I've been told more than once that some parks are different after dark, that the air grows heavier, that the rules of the wilderness change when the sun sinks. I never used to believe those whispers. I thought they were meant to scare tourists, to keep teenagers from sneaking out with flashlights and beer coolers. I was wrong. I learned too late that the night doesn't just belong to owls and coyotes. It belongs to something else. And once it notices you, the forest never forgets. My name isn't important anymore. Names lose their meaning when you've been hollowed out by silence and fear. But for most of my life, I was a ranger. I worked in the northern ranges of this country, the kind of places where the trees are older than any human memory, and the trails vanish beneath your boots if you step wrong. My job was simple on paper: protect the land, guide visitors, enforce rules, and keep watch over the boundaries of the park. But what no training manual tells you is that the park has rules of its own. And when you cross them, there is no handbook, no backup, no line you can call. You either survive by instinct, or you don't survive at all. I was 35 when I got assigned to this park. The locals had already warned me with those looks people give when they want to speak, but don't. At the diner in town, I heard half sentences over coffee mugs. Don't linger after dusk, and you'll hear it before you see it, and that cave up on Black Hollow Ridge, you stay clear. I laughed it off. I thought it was folklore, just small-town theater designed to make the woods seem larger than life. I didn't know then how fragile reason really was. The first time I felt it was a summer night. I was walking the South Trail, logging a few overdue notes on tree health, when the sun dropped quicker than I expected. The forest shifted with it. It wasn't just darker, it was denser. My flashlight beam felt swallowed whole by the trunks and the low mist rising from the moss. The insects that usually sang in a deafening chorus had gone mute. Silence. Perfect. Total silence. If you've ever worked in a forest, you know how wrong that is. Even in the dead of night, there's always something. A cricket, a leaf scratch, a bird shifting on a branch. But this was nothing, like the whole park had been muffled under a bell jar. That's when I heard it, a knock. 3 slow knocks, not like woodpeckers, not like branches falling. It was deliberate, spaced evenly apart, carrying through the trees as if the trunks themselves were amplifying the sound. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. Every instinct told me to rationalize, maybe another ranger out here, maybe a lost hiker signaling. But deep down, something inside me recoiled. I wanted to answer, to shout, but the air in my throat was stuck, thick, like I wasn't supposed to speak. I turned back to the cabin that night, walking faster than I meant to, telling myself it was nothing. But when I reached the cabin door, I saw mud streaked across the threshold. The prints weren't boot tracks or animal pads. They were bare, human-shaped, long and narrow, the toes pressed deep as if whoever left them had stood there for too long, waiting. That was only the beginning. Over the next weeks, the stories piled up like kindling. A camper swore he heard laughter echoing from the ridgeline, though his family was asleep beside him. A pair of hikers found their compass needles spinning wild under the shadow of the pines. And one night, I returned to the ranger station to find my logbook open on the desk, pages flipped to a blank sheet with the words, "You hear it too," scrawled in handwriting that wasn't mine. I tried to keep steady. I told myself a forest this vast holds plenty of mysteries, magnetic anomalies, echoes bouncing strangely, pranksters slipping in unseen. I wanted to believe reason could explain it all. But the park was testing me, stripping me piece by piece. And it knew exactly where to strike. You see, I've always carried a shadow from my past. My younger brother disappeared when I was 19. We were camping together, only 20 miles from here. He wandered off at night, barefoot, just to relieve himself. We never saw him again. The search lasted a week, then 2. Then it dwindled until it was only me, retracing the trails alone, calling his name into the endless dark. The sound of my own voice echoing back was worse than silence. I joined the service years later because I thought, somehow, if I protected others from the forest, I could undo what it had taken from me. So when I began to hear a voice at night calling my name, soft and low, I told myself it was memory playing tricks. Trauma, fatigue, maybe the wind bending through the hollows, but the voice didn't just echo, it answered. It was the second month in during a patrol past the old quarry. The night air was damp, the fog crawling low. I heard it as clear as if someone stood 10 feet behind me, my name, not shouted, whispered, drawn out like a secret. I turned, beam sweeping the mist, and nothing was there. But the air smelled sharp, metallic, like blood in your mouth when you bite your lip too hard. And in the gravel near my boots, I found the same prints, bare, human, pressing deeper into the earth than natural weight should allow. I wanted to leave then, to turn in my badge, to pack and go. But something in me needed answers. Maybe I thought if I solved it, if I stared into the cave and saw nothing but rock, I could finally silence the guilt of my brother's vanishing. That's the cruel trick the park plays. It doesn't just scare you, it knows what you carry, and it twists it into bait. That cave. God, that cave. It sat at the northern boundary up in Black Hollow Ridge. The locals spoke of it in half-muttered phrases. Kids dared each other to approach its mouth, but swore they never crossed inside. The maps didn't mark it, though every ranger who'd worked here longer than a season knew where it was. I had avoided it until one night I couldn't, not because I wanted to, but because I felt pulled, like the forest had arranged each path, each whisper to funnel me there. The sky that evening was strangled by clouds. My radio hissed with static, though I wasn't far from base. The deeper I walked, the colder the air sank until my breath hung heavy in front of me. By the time I reached the ridge, I couldn't hear the forest anymore. No branches shifting, no trickle of creek, nothing. The cave yawned open like a wound in the hillside, blacker than night itself, and from within it came a draft that smelled like damp stone and something sour like fruit left to rot. And then the knocks returned. 3. Slow. Heavy. From inside. I gripped my flashlight until my knuckles burned white, and for the first time in years, I thought of my brother not as memory, but as presence, as if the knocks weren't warning me to leave, but asking me to enter. My heart raced, every reason screaming no, but every guilt-ridden shadow whispering yes. That's where the real fear began, not in the cave itself, but in me, in the part of me that wanted to step inside. I stood at the cave's mouth. Every part of me locked between two opposing instincts. The ranger trained to preserve life and follow rules, and the brother who had never stopped searching. The draft that rolled from inside wasn't just cold, it felt intentional, brushing my skin like a hand, testing whether I'd flinch. The beam of my flashlight broke against the darkness, swallowed whole, like light had no business here. I whispered my brother's name without meaning to. It slipped out the way a breath fogs in the cold, and in return, deep inside, I heard it whispered back. My name, my own name, distorted as though spoken through water or echoed by lungs too hollow to hold air. It wasn't my brother's voice. It wasn't anyone's voice. It was the cave's voice. The ranger in me said, "Turn around, log the incident, call for backup." But the man I really was, the one still haunted by an empty tent and a half-zip sleeping bag, took a step forward. My boots scraped stone, the sound bouncing back sharper than it should have. I raised the light and caught the shimmer of wet walls, mineral slicks glowing faintly like veins under skin. Deeper inside, the air tightened. The smell grew worse, rot mixing with something sterile, chemical, like hospital corridors. I counted each breath, convincing myself it would keep panic from curling in my stomach. 1, 2, 3. Exhale. Step. My beam picked up old carvings in the rock, not graffiti, not random scrapes. They were deliberate shapes, layered over each other like generations had etched their marks. Spirals, stick figures with arms too long, circles surrounding tiny dots. My gut clenched. These weren't kids fooling around. These were warnings or prayers. The knocks came again, closer, louder. Knock, knock, knock. My knees nearly gave under me. My light swung and struck a far wall. At first I thought it was wet stone, but as the shadow resolved, I realized I was staring at handprints. Dozens. Some small, like children. Some impossibly large. each print pressed into the stone as if the rock had softened for a moment and hardened around them again. I staggered back, light shaking, and for the first time I thought I should run. But then I heard it. Laughter. Thin, high-pitched, like a child's giggle echoing from somewhere deeper. My blood ran cold. My brother had been only 12 when he disappeared. My mind knew it wasn't him, couldn't be him, but the sound sliced through reason. I followed. The tunnel narrowed, walls brushing my shoulders. The carvings thickened, spirals on top of spirals. The smell sharpened until bile rose in my throat. My beam caught movement, just the edge of it. A figure slipping around the bend, thin, pale, its limbs longer than they should have been. My pulse hammered. I didn't call out. Something primal warned me that speaking would acknowledge it, invite it closer. When I reached the bend, the laughter stopped. In its place came breathing. Slow, deep, wet, like lungs half drowned. My light quivered across the chamber ahead, and that's when I saw them. Boots. Not new, not clean. Weather-worn, cracked leather, the kind issued decades ago by the service. And above them, the remains of a uniform. A ranger's jacket slumped against the stone, the bones inside it bent in ways no fall could explain. My breath caught. The badge on the chest plate still gleamed under the dust. Not my name, not mine, but a ranger who had walked into the dark before me. The cave hadn't just taken hikers, it had taken us. I forced myself closer, eyes wide, trying to read the badge when the air shifted again. A warmth now on my neck, unmistakable. Breath. I spun, light sweeping, and the beam hit something I'll never erase. A face, inches from mine, but not human. Its skin was stretched thin, gray as the cave stone, eyes black and depthless, no whites at all. Its mouth was too wide, split with cracks, lips raw and torn. And yet, it was smiling, not with joy, with recognition. The beam flickered, my chest seized. I stumbled back, striking the wall, and the laughter erupted again, not from one throat, but from many, overlapping, a chorus of children and men and women, all spilling from the walls themselves. My light cut through empty space, nothing there, but the sound clawed inside my skull. I ran. I don't remember choosing to, only the scrape of boots against stone and the tearing of breath through my chest. The knocks followed, knock, 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 slamming from behind me, from ahead, from the walls. My light struck those handprints again, but now they glistened wet, as if freshly pressed. The mouth of the cave appeared, a black rectangle framed by fog. I lunged toward it, ribs aching, throat raw from air too thick to swallow. The cold night hit me like surfacing from underwater. I collapsed to my knees just beyond the ridge, the cave gaping behind me. Silence. The forest had returned. Crickets chirping, branches swaying, normal sound. But the prints in the dirt outside the cave weren't normal. Dozens again, bare feet leading away from the mouth, spreading out into the trees. And at the edge of them, smaller prints, a child's. My vision blurred with tears I hadn't felt coming. I wanted to believe I'd hallucinated, that stress and grief had twisted the cave into something worse than it was. But when I reached the ranger station that night, mud clung to my boots and hands, dried with that same sour rot smell. I logged the incident, wrote it plain as I could, but when I checked the next morning, the entry was gone. The logbook was open to a fresh page. Across it, in the same uneven scrawl as before, were 4 words. You went inside. Good. For the next week, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the face. That grin. And behind my eyelids, I heard the laughter swelling. I started to doubt myself, to doubt everything. The line between what was outside and what was inside blurred. When hikers asked for advice, I caught myself scanning their faces for something stretched, something hollow. Every trail I walked, I expected to see bare footprints crossing ahead of me. But the forest wasn't finished. It had more to show me. One night, as storms rolled across the horizon, I patrolled the lake shore. The rain had paused, but thunder still echoed across the water. The surface rippled under flashes of lightning. I was alone, or so I thought, until the beam of my light caught movement near the far dock. A figure, standing, still, a child. My chest clenched. For one impossible moment, I thought, him, my brother. I shouted, my voice breaking, the sound swallowed by distance. The figure turned. Lightning flashed, and I saw its face, or the absence of one. Smooth skin where features should have been, no eyes, no mouth. It raised an arm, slow and deliberate, and pointed at me. Then it slipped soundlessly into the lake. I ran, nearly sliding on the wet grass, light scanning the water. Nothing. No ripples. No bubbles. The surface was calm again, as if it had never been disturbed, but the mud at the dock's edge bore prints. Bare. Human. And among them, smaller ones. That night I sat in my cabin, rain hammering the roof, and I admitted something I had resisted since my first patrol here. The park was alive in ways no one had words for. It wasn't just land or water or trees. It was something older, and it wanted us inside it, and me. I was already halfway there. Sleep stopped coming altogether after that night at the lake. Even when exhaustion clawed at me, I couldn't risk closing my eyes. Because when I did, the dreams came. Dreams too precise to be dreams. I'd see the cave again, but I wasn't alone. I'd feel hands, small ones, cold as stone, pressing against my arms, my chest holding me down while the knocks echoed in rhythm, shaking my ribs from the inside. When I woke, my skin bore faint smudges, dirt streaked where no dirt should have been. The other rangers began to notice my decline. They didn't say it outright, but their eyes lingered too long, watching the tremor in my hands as I signed paperwork, the way my uniform seemed looser each day. One of them, a veteran who had worked this park 20 years before me, pulled me aside after shift. He was quiet for a long time before he spoke, like the words might cost him. "You went up to the hollow," he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer, because denial would have been pointless. He nodded slowly, eyes heavy with something between pity and warning. "They never let you go once you cross that line." I wanted to demand what he meant. I wanted to shout, to beg him for answers. But the look on his face silenced me. His lips pressed together, his jaw flexed, and then he walked away, leaving me with more dread than I'd had before. Because now I knew this wasn't just my madness. It had happened before, and maybe no one ever truly escaped. That night, the storm returned. Sheets of rain lashed the trees. Thunder cracked like the sky splitting open. The station radio crackled with half-heard chatter, distorted by interference. I sat in my cabin, staring at the door, convinced that at any moment someone or something would knock. And then it did. 3. Slow. Heavy. Knock. 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 I froze, lungs locked, sweat cold against my back. Lightning illuminated the windows, but no shadow crossed the porch. Another set of knocks followed, this time from the back wall, then the side. The sound moved around the cabin in circles, deliberate, unhurried, like something pacing, testing every weakness. I grabbed the rifle from the rack, hands shaking too violently to hold it steady. My rational mind screamed at me, no animal knocks. No pranksters would dare this storm. And yet the sound kept circling until finally it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. My heart hammered so loud I thought it would give me away. I sat there until the storm eased, dawn bleeding gray into the trees. When I opened the door, the porch steps were slick with rain, but in the mud below were the prints again. Dozens. Bare feet, small ones among them. I snapped. I couldn't stay passive anymore. Couldn't just endure. If the park wanted me, it would have to take me on my feet. So I went back to the hollow. The ridge loomed under low clouds, mist curling through the tree line like breath. My body screamed with fatigue, but anger carried me forward. I wanted to end it, to tear whatever haunted me from its lair and drag the truth into daylight. The cave gaped wide as before, but this time I didn't hesitate. I stepped inside, beam steady, forcing each breath calm. The air was colder, thicker, as though the storm had settled inside the stone itself. The spirals etched into the walls seemed sharper, deeper, like they'd been carved fresh since I last came. As I pushed further in, I heard them again. The voices. Not just laughter this time. Words. Muted, overlapping, but words. My name, over and over, spoken in tones that shifted, childlike, mocking, pleading. I gritted my teeth, refusing to answer. But inside, the guilt twisted deeper. The tunnel widened into a chamber I hadn't seen before. My light swept across stone formations, stalactites dripping like teeth, and at the center, piled high, were objects. Boots, jackets, backpacks, some moldy, some fresh, radios with dead batteries, canteens half crushed, and bones. Too many bones. Rib cages collapsed like cages too long abandoned. Skulls with mouths open as if frozen mid-scream. I staggered forward, bile burning my throat, my light landing on something half buried near the top. Fabric. Familiar. My breath caught. It was a faded blue hoodie, one I'd seen in old photographs, worn by a boy with a shy smile. My brother's hoodie. The world spun. My knees hit the stone. I clawed toward it, fingers trembling as I pulled the fabric free. And that's when the pile shifted. Slowly, deliberately. The bones slid aside, tumbling with hollow clatter, and something rose from beneath them. Taller than a man, its limbs impossibly thin, bending wrong at the joints. Its head tilted as it emerged, face smooth except for the smile carved into it, lips split wide. In its hand, it held the hoodie, the one I thought I'd taken, the one I still clutched. I dropped mine. Both hoodies hit the ground at once, identical. The thing tilted its head again, and the chamber filled with laughter, not echoing, not disembodied, but pouring from its mouth. Dozens of voices layered in one, each one a stolen memory. I stumbled backward, the light quivering over its form, and realized the handprints on the walls weren't ancient. They were recent. They were still being made. Because as I watched, it pressed one long hand against the stone, fingers sinking into the rock like it was clay, leaving a new print beside the old. Fresh, glimmering, wet. I ran. I didn't look back. My beam swung wildly, carving jagged arcs through the tunnel. The knocks followed, pounding the stone so hard dust rained from the ceiling. My chest tore with each gasp, my vision tunneled, but I didn't stop until daylight struck my face. I collapsed outside, sprawled in the dirt, hoodie clutched in my fists. I didn't remember grabbing it. I didn't want it. I hurled it away, but the wind caught it, dragging it toward the trees where it snagged on a branch, swaying like a body hung in effigy. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about scaring me. It was about claiming me, piece by piece, memory by memory, until I couldn't tell where I ended and the park began. The days that followed blurred. I still walked patrols, I still signed logs, but everything was off. Shadows lingered too long, voices whispered just at the edge of hearing. The faces of visitors seemed distorted, their smiles too wide, their eyes hollow. Sometimes I'd blink, and they'd be normal again. Sometimes I'd blink, and they wouldn't. And always at night, the knocks returned. I told myself if I ignored it, if I refused to go back, maybe it would fade. But deep inside, I knew better. The cave had let me go once, not out of mercy, but out of patience. It was waiting. It always waits. And the worst part, the part that rotted me from the inside, was the doubt. Because what if it was my brother's voice I heard in those tunnels? What if he was still inside, not gone, not dead, but changed? What if leaving him there was worse than losing him? That was the hook. That was the chain it wrapped around me. And every knock on the cabin door pulled it tighter. By the 4th month, I no longer trusted the daylight. Sunlight was supposed to be the ranger's ally, the clean white edge that burned away superstition. But in this park, light only gave shape to the dread that had taken root. The trees seemed taller, bending in subtle arcs that guided me toward the hollow. Trails I'd walked 100 times bent wrong, spilling me into clearings I didn't recognize, even though the map said they were right where they'd always been. The forest was shifting. Around me or inside me, I couldn't say anymore. I started avoiding my reflection, not just in mirrors, but in the black gloss of the lake, the shine of a window at night. Every time I caught a glimpse, something about my face looked wrong. My eyes lingered too long, or my jaw flexed when I wasn't moving it. Once, as I leaned over the station sink to splash cold water on my face, I swore the reflection smiled before I did. Teeth too wide, a grin carved like stone. I smashed the mirror with my fist and told the others it had fallen. That was when the headaches began, splitting, blinding, like someone tapping a chisel behind my eyes. And always in threes. 3 pulses of pain, pause, 3 more. I couldn't escape the rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. Even my own body had become an instrument for the cave. I knew I should report it, Knew I should ask for transfer, request leave, something. But the shame kept me locked in place. I was a ranger, protector, guide, the man who answered fear with steadiness. How could I admit that I had let the dark inside me, that I couldn't keep my own boundaries safe? The forest had found my weakness, and it was eating me alive. Then came the night of the search. A family reported their teenage son missing after sundown. He'd wandered from camp chasing the glow of fireflies, they said, and hadn't returned. My blood ran cold as I listened, because I knew that story. I'd lived it. My brother's name was written across every syllable. We organized a search team, sweeping the trails with lanterns and radios crackling static. The woods felt denser than ever, shadows crowding our lights. The parents trailed behind us, their faces pale masks of desperation. I pushed harder than the rest, scanning every tree, every break in the brush, my pulse hammering. I would not let it happen again. Hours passed. Then I saw him. Far ahead, just beyond the reach of the others' beams, a boy stood at the edge of the path. Small, thin, wearing a dark hoodie. Relief surged through me so violently I nearly collapsed. I shouted, "We've got him!" and broke into a run. The boy turned his head. Lightning forked across the sky at that exact moment, lighting the trail in stark white, and I saw that his face wasn't a face at all. Smooth skin, no eyes, no mouth, just a blank canvas where features should have been. I stopped dead, breath catching. The boy raised his arm, pointing into the trees, then stepped backward and vanished into the dark. The others rushed up behind me, lanterns bobbing, asking what I'd seen. My mouth opened, but no words came. I wanted to lie, to say I'd seen nothing. But before I could, a scream ripped through the forest. It was the mother. She was holding something in her hands, rocking back and forth, the boy's shoe. Muddy, torn at the sole, but fresh enough that the laces still bore the warmth of skin. We never found him. The search went on until dawn, and then another day, and another. The park consumed him as surely as it had consumed my brother. I should have quit then, should have packed my bag and fled before the thing in the hollow tightened its grip further. But I didn't, because part of me believed it was my fault, that I had led the boy into the dark by speaking too loudly, by searching too desperately. The cave had used me again, and I had obeyed. The days that followed stripped the last of my defenses. I began hearing the knocks even during daylight patrols. 3 taps echoing off trunks that swayed in windless silence. The wildlife seemed wrong, deer that stared too long, raccoons moving in circles, birds perched in rows along the ridgeline, all facing the same direction. The forest wasn't alive. It was choreographed, rehearsed, as if something unseen was arranging every piece into place. And then came the smell. At first it was faint, metallic, sour, drifting in patches across the trails, but soon it followed me everywhere, seeping into my clothes, clinging to my skin. I scrubbed until my hands bled, but it never faded. Some nights I'd wake with the taste of it on my tongue, like copper pennies and spoiled fruit. And when I spat into the sink, the water ran pink. One evening, exhausted beyond sense, I dozed in the cabin chair. When I startled awake, the door was open. Rain slanted through the gap, soaking the floor. I bolted up, heart pounding, and in the corner of the room I saw him. A boy, small, barefoot, dripping with rain. He stared at me with eyes black as the cave. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate, and when he opened his mouth, the sound that came out wasn't a voice. It was knocking, loud, sharp, inside my skull. I lunged for the rifle, but by the time I turned back, the boy was gone. Only muddy prints remained, leading to the door, vanishing into the storm. I lost time after that, hours, days I couldn't tell. My journal entries turned to scrawl, the handwriting not always mine. Once I woke to find the words "He's still waiting" written across the entire wall in black charcoal. My hands were stained. I don't remember doing it. The other rangers avoided me by then. They whispered when I passed, their eyes darting with fear. I don't blame them. I must have looked half dead, sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, smelling like the cave itself. But none of them stopped me. None of them asked me to leave. And sometimes I wondered if they, too, had been claimed, if all of us were just waiting for our turn to step into the hollow and never come out. One night, I woke to find myself standing at the edge of the ridge again. I didn't remember walking there. The cave mouth yawned before me, mist curling from within like smoke from a wound. And I realized then what terrified me most. Not that I might fall inside, but that I wanted to. Because maybe, just maybe, my brother was still in there. And if he was, I couldn't leave him alone any longer. The forest knows this. It knows me better than I know myself. And each night it whispers my name, softer, closer, until one day I'll answer. The night I finally returned to the hollow was not chosen by me. It was chosen for me. I'd resisted for weeks, clinging to my cabin as if the walls could protect me, pacing until my boots wore the floorboards thin. But when the knocking started inside my skull instead of at the door, I knew resistance was finished. The forest had been patient. It was done waiting. The air outside was heavy with fog, thicker than any mist I'd seen. It crawled along the ground, veiling the roots and rocks, muffling sound. My flashlight's beam reached only a few feet before being swallowed. Yet the path to the ridge was clear, as if the forest itself had shifted to funnel me forward. I no longer needed maps or memory. My feet carried me unerringly to the cave, guided by a rhythm inside me. Knock, knock, knock. When the hollow came into view, I didn't hesitate. The mouth was wider than I remembered, jagged edges like teeth glistening with condensation. It breathed. I swear it did. Each gust of cold air felt timed with my lungs, pulling me in. Inside, the carvings had multiplied. Spirals upon spirals, fresh gouges dripping with wet stone, as if carved only moments before. The air was thicker, denser, humming with vibrations I could feel in my teeth. My light caught the chamber where the pile of objects had been, and I saw that it had grown. New boots, new jackets, radios still crackling faintly, though their batteries should have died. And among them, my own pack, the one I'd left in my cabin. It sat neatly atop the mound, straps arranged as though waiting for me. My heart clenched. I dropped the light for a moment, clawing at my back to make sure it wasn't already missing. My own pack was still there, which meant the one before me was something else, a reflection, a duplication. The hollow was already remaking me. I turned, ready to flee, when the voices began again. Not laughter this time, not my name, something worse. A child's cry. It echoed from deeper inside. Fragile, broken. Help, please. My brother's voice. I shook. Every part of me screamed. It was a trick, a lure, the same bait that had pulled him into the dark decades ago. But the guilt inside me, the hollow that had never closed, overpowered reason. I couldn't ignore it. Not this time. I plunged deeper, light trembling against stone. The tunnel twisted tighter, walls glistening wet like veins under translucent skin. The crying grew louder. Please, it's so dark. Then the tunnel opened into a chamber I had never seen before. My light swept across the walls and froze. Faces, not carved, not painted. Faces pressed into the stone itself, like the rock had softened and swallowed them whole. Eyes shut, mouths open in silent screams, features warped by pressure, some fresh, skin pale against the rock. Some so old they had fused entirely, stone masks in eternal agony. I staggered forward, bile clawing my throat. My light passed over one face, small and round, eyes still closed. I fell to my knees. It was him, my brother, pressed into the wall, lips parted as if still breathing, as if still calling out for me. I pressed my hands to the stone, desperate to pull him free. His skin was cold, slick, as if half flesh, half rock. I sobbed, tugging until my fingers bled, but he didn't move. His eyes fluttered open. For a heartbeat, hope surged, until I saw that they weren't his eyes. They were black voids, depthless, endless. And when his mouth opened, the voice that came out wasn't his either. It was mine. Stay, it whispered, perfectly in my tone, perfectly in my cadence. Stay with me. I reeled back, falling hard onto the stone. The chamber erupted in sound. Every face began to moan, to scream, to laugh, a cacophony of voices layered on top of one another until my skull rattled with the weight of them. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't matter. They weren't outside. They were inside. My light flickered. I saw movement from the corner of my eye. something pulling itself free of the stone, limbs unbending like a puppet freed from its strings. It towered over me, skin gray, body thin and impossible, head tilting with that wide, split grin. In its chest, beneath translucent flesh, I saw dozens of faces shifting, pressing against the skin from within, each one mouthing words I couldn't hear. It leaned closer, and in the chorus of voices I heard a phrase clear as glass. "You're already one of us." The air collapsed. My light died. Darkness consumed everything. For a long time, I don't remember moving. I don't remember breathing. The next thing I knew, I was outside again, sprawled on the ridge in the pale gray of dawn. The cave loomed silent behind me. My hands were torn, my clothes shredded, but my pack was still on my back. Inside the pack was the blue hoodie. I didn't put it there. I left the ridge broken. Something inside me had cracked beyond repair. The world hasn't been the same since. The trees never stop whispering. The knocks follow me no matter where I go, on doors, on walls, sometimes on the inside of my skull when I try to sleep. And reflections are the worst. I've stopped shaving because I can't bear to look. My mirror self smiles when I don't. Sometimes I hear it tapping on the other side of the glass. I write this now not as a ranger, but as a warning. They told me never to enter this park at night. I didn't listen. And I've carried the hollow inside me ever since. If you're hearing this, take the lesson I never could. The darkness doesn't just belong to the forest. It belongs to something older, something that waits in caves, in silence, in the places maps forget, and once it knows your name, it will never let go. Do not follow the knocks, do not answer the voices, do not look into the stone faces too long, because if you do, the park will learn you. It will shape you, and one day someone will walk these trails and swear they hear you whispering their name. And maybe you'll be the one smiling in the dark. The forest is quieter now, quieter in a way that isn't natural, quieter in a way that feels like a waiting breath held too long. I walk its trails still, because leaving is no longer an option. Even when I drive beyond the boundary lines, when I look in the mirror and tell myself I've escaped, the truth waits for me in silence. The hollow doesn't need the ridge anymore. It's inside me. I've stopped marking the days. Time has loosened, as if the forest has bent the hours into loops. I patrol in daylight, but the sun no longer brings warmth. Even in midsummer, I feel the damp chill of stone against my skin, hear the trickle of unseen water echoing through caverns that shouldn't be beneath my feet. And sometimes when I step into a clearing, the sky above isn't blue but black, stars where the sun should be. I blink and it's gone. But I know I didn't imagine it. The hollow doesn't just live underground. It stretches, bleeds into the sky, the water, the marrow of everything. I've caught myself humming the rhythm of the knocks without meaning to. 3 taps on the cabin table as I write reports. 3 thuds of my boot heel as I stand waiting. I can't stop. The sound has rewired me. My pulse even seems to beat in 3s now. Knock, knock, knock. A rhythm that isn't mine, but theirs. The worst part is what I see in others. Visitors come and go, laughing with families, taking photographs, confident in the innocence of the forest. But sometimes their shadows bend wrong. Too long, too thin, reaching ahead of them instead of behind. Sometimes when they smile, I glimpse teeth that don't belong, lips parting too wide. And I know then that the hollow isn't just mine. It's been spreading, slipping out through anyone foolish enough to step too close after dark. The veteran ranger who once warned me avoids me now. He doesn't meet my eyes when we pass. But one evening, as I logged the day's patrol, he came to my cabin door. He didn't knock. He just stood there, pale in the twilight, and said one sentence before walking away. "They'll take us all in the end." I wanted to ask him what he meant. I wanted to beg him to explain. But the way he said it wasn't despair. It was acceptance. He'd given up fighting long ago. Maybe that's why he'd lasted so long here, not because he was stronger, because he surrendered. I can't do that. Not yet. One night, when the silence was so thick it pressed on my skull, I returned to the ridge. I told myself I would burn it, that if I set fire to the entrance, if I collapsed the stone, Maybe I could close the mouth that had swallowed so many. The plan was simple. Fuel canisters. A flare. I stood at the cave's lip, hands trembling, the fire in my grip like borrowed courage. But as soon as the flame flared red against the dark, the knocks started. Not 3. Hundreds. All around me, from inside the stone, from the trees, from the air itself. A storm of knocks, each one like a fist slamming my chest. I dropped the canister, and in the flare's light, I saw faces moving inside the cave walls. Dozens. Hundreds. They weren't pressed there anymore. They were shifting, eyes opening, mouths grinning, all in unison. And among them, my brother's face. He wasn't pleading, he wasn't crying, he was smiling, wide, split-lip grin, the same as the thing that had followed me since my first night here. He tilted his head just as it had tilted its head when it leaned into me in the dark, and then he spoke, not with his own voice, with mine. You can't burn what you are. The flare sputtered out. I was left kneeling in the dark, shaking. The fire inside me doused in a cold I can't describe. I didn't try again. Because he was right. The hollow is not a place anymore. It's a condition. A sickness. An inheritance passed down through whispers, through fear, through anyone who dares enter when the sun goes down. It takes your memories, your guilt, your reflection, and feeds them back to you until you can't tell where the forest ends and you begin. And when you finally collapse into its arms, it doesn't kill you. It wears you. It spreads you like moss, like mist, like roots. I've begun to notice changes in myself. My reflection smiles more often than not, even when I don't. My shadow doesn't always match my movements. And sometimes when I press my hand to the cabin wall in exhaustion, the wood gives just slightly beneath my fingers, leaving a faint imprint that takes too long to fade. I should leave, but there's nowhere to go. Wherever I run, the hollow will follow. Because it isn't the park. It isn't the cave. It's me. The last time I walked the hollow's edge, I heard children laughing in the trees. I couldn't see them, but the laughter moved around me in circles, like the knocks used to. And then one voice rose above the others, high and clear, and it said my name, my brother's tone. I turned, heart breaking all over again, and for an instant I saw him standing there, barefoot, hoodie torn, eyes black, grinning. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just stood there, tears on my face, because for the first time I understood. He hadn't been taken. He had been remade, and now I was being remade too. So I'll tell you what the locals once told me, though I didn't listen. Do not enter this park at night. Do not answer the knocks. Do not follow the laughter. If you see a face you love pressed into stone, turn away, because once you step inside, it's not the forest that changes. It's you. And when the day comes that someone else walks this ridge, lost and searching, maybe it will be my voice they hear whispering their name. Maybe it will be my handprint pressed wet and fresh into the wall. Maybe it will be my smile waiting for them in the dark. That is the legacy of the hollow. That is the price of not listening to warnings. And now that I've told you, maybe you'll hear it too. Knock, knock, knock. I still hear it when the wind cuts through the trees at night. The static, the trembling voice breaking through the radio, the last words I never should have ignored. Out here, in these mountains, silence can feel heavier than thunder. And when it cracks open, you're forced to hear the things you've buried. My name doesn't matter as much as the badge I've carried for half my life. I've been a ranger since I was 23. Patrolling the deep wilderness of the Northern Rockies, a place most people think of as postcard perfect. Crystal lakes, elk grazing in meadows, snow-fed rivers flashing like knives under the sun. But when the sun falls, when those same rivers swallow the last light, the woods turn on you. I used to tell myself fear was just inexperience, that people only got lost because they didn't respect the land. But I've learned that sometimes the land itself watches you, waits for you, and swallows you whole when it wants to. I was 39 when it began unraveling, the year the forest stopped being my workplace and started being my judge. That year I had already logged more rescues than usual, Tourists lost off-trail, hunters gone too far chasing elk, hikers collapsing from exhaustion. Every call was a chance to prove I could still be the one to bring them back alive. But behind every routine search, there was always the same faint static on the radio, the sound that reminded me of the one call I'd failed to answer years ago. A fellow ranger, older than me, had radioed in his final message, panic cutting through his words, something about eyes in the trees. They never found him. His last call lived in the static, a ghost riding the frequencies. That summer, I felt his absence more than ever. Something about the woods felt off, though I couldn't explain why. Animals avoided certain clearings. Tracks I'd never seen before pressed into the mud, too long for a wolf, too wide for a bear, too heavy to belong to anything I knew. I told myself it was erosion, misread shadows. Rangers are trained not to let imagination get the better of them. And yet, imagination was exactly what the forest fed on. One night in early June, I was alone at my outpost cabin, a crooked structure tucked 5 miles into the backcountry, no electricity except for a humming generator, no company but a half-rotten bunk and the old Ranger radio bolted to the desk. Around midnight, just as I was jotting down patrol notes, I heard it. 3 slow knocks against the cabin door. Not the sharp rap of a lost hiker begging to be let in, not the skittering of branches or a woodpecker at work. It was deliberate, slow, heavy. I froze. My flashlight beam trembled against the wooden boards of the door. Procedure told me to ask first, open later. This is Ranger Station North. Who's there? My voice echoed flatly. No answer. Just silence pressing against the cabin, so thick I could hear the wires in the generator hum. I gripped my flashlight tighter, swallowed, and edged toward the door. Every instinct told me not to open it, but pride, that stubborn weight Rangers carry, drove me forward. I had dealt with lost hunters before, drunk fishermen, kids who thought scaring a ranger was a good joke. I flung the door open. The clearing was empty. Moonlight washed over the trees, the grass silver under its glow. No boot prints in the dirt, no shadows retreating, just the endless forest staring back. I scanned the tree line with my flashlight, its beam cutting across branches. For a second, I thought I caught movement, a figure too tall, too lean, but when I swung the light back, there was only the dark. I shut the door, forced a laugh out of my lungs like I was mocking myself, and sat back at the desk. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, though. Hours crawled by. The generator coughed once, then resumed its drone, and just before dawn, as the first gray lights slipped between the pines, I smelled it. Something sharp, metallic like iron cooking in the air. Blood. I stepped outside, boots crunching in the frosted grass. The smell thickened as I neared the tree line. And there, half hidden in the brush, was a deer. Its body torn open, ribs cracked apart like fingers snapped backward. Not eaten, not dragged off, displayed. I reported it over the radio, voice steady, refusing to admit the truth gnawing inside me, that this wasn't the work of wolves or mountain lions or any predator that fit in the ranger's handbook. Something had watched my cabin last night, knocked on my door, and left me a gift to find in the morning. The other rangers shrugged it off. Predation, they said. Wolves sometimes kill for sport, but the tracks around the carcass weren't wolf. They weren't anything. Just depressions in the earth, wide and deep, like something heavy had pressed down without toes, without claws, without shape. That was the first story. The one I still told myself was explainable. The second came weeks later, on a trail I knew better than the lines of my own palm. I had been sent to check the ridge path near Black Hollow, a stretch of forest locals whispered about but never entered. The official maps marked it as unstable terrain. Sinkholes, loose shale, off-limits. But that morning, we'd gotten a report from a pair of backpackers who swore they'd seen a man standing at the mouth of a cave there, waving for them to come closer. His face, they said, looked pale, blurred, like someone out of focus. When I arrived, I expected to find nothing. That was usually the case. A trick of distance, nerves from too many hours in the woods. The ridge was quiet, the pines swaying with a low sigh, the earth damp from a night of rain. And then, About 30 yards ahead, I saw it. The cave mouth. A wound carved into the hillside, rimmed with moss and shadow, and someone, or something, standing at its entrance. I froze, squinting against the morning haze. The figure was tall, shoulders hunched, arms long. Too long. My breath caught. For a moment, I convinced myself it was just another ranger, maybe checking the site, but no ranger I knew stood that way, body sagging like its bones had forgotten where they belonged. "Hey!" I called, my voice cracking. The figure didn't move. I lifted my radio, thumb on the button. Static hissed back at me. No voice, no response, just the same broken sound I'd heard in the old recordings of the ranger who'd vanished years ago. The static seemed to carry his breath, his panic, and then layered under it, I heard something else. Not a voice. A low, wet, a growl stretched into a shape that didn't belong to any animal I knew. The figure stepped back into the cave, swallowed by dark. I should have turned, should have reported it in and left, but pride and fear make a toxic mixture. Against all reason, I moved closer, boots crunching gravel, my hand trembling around the radio. The smell hit me first. Wet stone, mold, and something rancid like meat gone bad. The air was colder near the cave, unnaturally so. My flashlight beam trembled across the entrance. Inside, the walls glistened with moisture. Drips echoed deeper in. The darkness felt alive, breathing. I wanted to take just one step inside to prove I hadn't imagined it. My foot hovered at the threshold. Then the knock came again. Not behind me this time. Not on the cabin door. From inside the cave, 3 slow, deliberate knocks against stone. I stumbled backward, heart hammering against my ribs. The radio screeched with static, and for a split second, just a split second, I swore I heard the same final words from the ranger years ago, the voice that had haunted me ever since. Don't follow it in. The forest didn't sound the same after that day. Every creak of pine, every shift of wind carried an echo of those 3 knocks. I tried to bury it, convince myself that stress was getting the better of me, that I had mistaken dripping water for something deliberate. But the problem with lies is that they fester inside you, and when you walk alone through endless trees, those lies sharpen until they feel truer than the truth itself. I reported the cave sighting, of course, though I left out the figure. Said only that I'd investigated and confirmed the ridge was unstable. My supervisor didn't question it. Sometimes the forest writes off its own ghosts, at least on paper, but I couldn't erase the sound of the knocking from my head. Not when it had mimicked what I'd heard on my cabin door weeks before, not when it felt like it had waited for me. By July, the woods were swollen with heat. Mosquitoes swarmed like clouds over the swamps, and the rivers ran low and sluggish. That's when the disappearances began. First, it was a young couple from Denver, hikers who had gone off trail looking for wildflowers. Their tent was found pitched neatly beside a creek, their gear inside untouched. Their boots stood side by side outside the flap, laces loose, as though they'd stepped out only for a moment. No footprints beyond the tent, just grass bent toward the trees like something had brushed past in the night. Then came the hunter from Idaho. He'd radioed his buddy to say he was following elk tracks near Black Hollow. That was the last anyone heard from him. Search dogs refused to go past a certain line of trees. They whined, pulled their handlers back, tails low. We combed the area for days and found nothing, except for a single broad depression in the moss, a place where the ground looked pressed down as though something massive had crouched there, watching. The locals whispered what they always whispered in years like this, that the old things had come back, that the hollow had opened again. They spoke of a thing that lived between cave and shadow, not animal, not human. Some called it a giant, some a spirit, some a curse left by miners who had once dug into the mountain and never returned. None of them said the word Yeti. That was too clean, too folkloric. This was something dirtier, closer to bone. I didn't want to believe any of it. I clung to protocol, to search patterns and maps, to my logbook. But late at night, in the cabin, the radio would crackle alive without warning. Static, broken, and warbling, like someone trying to force words through a mouth too full of water. More than once, I grabbed the receiver and barked out, "Identify yourself." More than once, the only answer was a long, distorted groan that made the fillings in my teeth ache. One night, though, it wasn't static. It was a voice, not clear, not steady, but human. "Don't stay away." I dropped the pen in my hand, heart slamming. I knew that voice. It belonged to the ranger who'd vanished years ago, the man whose last call had been filed away as inconclusive. The same man whose final recording had haunted me in training sessions when they taught us about communication failure. But this wasn't a recording. This was live. "Say again," I whispered into the receiver, as if afraid the dark outside would hear me. "Who is this?" Static swallowed the answer, a hiss so sharp I had to yank the radio away from my ear, and then silence. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the cave mouth yawning open, the figure stepping back into its throat. I saw the deer carcass, ribs splayed wide like warning signs. I saw boots left by a tent, neat and patient, waiting for their owners to step back in. The next morning, I hiked the ridge again, not because protocol told me to, but because I needed proof that the forest wasn't playing me like an instrument. The air was heavy with smoke from distant wildfires, the sun reduced to a dull red disk above the tree line. I carried my rifle this time, though I told myself it was for bears. When I reached Black Hollow, the air shifted, cooler, damp, though it hadn't rained in days. My skin prickled as if I'd stepped through an invisible curtain. The cave mouth waited, unchanged, silent, but the smell, God, the smell, rolled out thick as fog, rot, wet fur, the copper tang of blood. I forced myself to circle the area, eyes scanning for tracks. That's when I found it. A scrap of fabric snagged on a thorn bush, dark green, torn, stiff with dried blood. My chest clenched. It matched the jacket description of the missing hunter. I bagged the evidence and started back down the ridge. Every sound behind me turned my stomach, the snap of a twig, the slow groan of branches. Once I heard breathing. Not wind, not animal. Breathing, steady, measured, matching my pace. I quickened my steps, the breathing quickened too. By the time I reached the base of the ridge, I was nearly running. When I finally stopped and turned, the forest stood still, silent, watching. That night, I made a mistake. I stayed awake in the cabin, clutching my rifle, waiting for something to happen. And just before dawn, something did. It began with the smell. That same metallic iron, thick enough to burn the back of my throat. Then the sound. Knock, 3 times. Slow. Against the cabin wall just beneath the window. I raised the rifle, the barrel quivering. "Show yourself," I barked. My voice cracked, betraying me. Silence. Then another knock, lower this time, closer to the floorboards. I stumbled back, rifle aimed, breath ragged. The radio screeched alive, static filling the cabin. Through it, faint, almost drowned by noise, came words, "Don't let it in." I didn't sleep again for days. Every patrol was a blur. Every rustle of brush felt deliberate. I began marking trees with chalk, trying to track where I felt the air shift, where the smells thickened. My map grew crowded with circles and arrows, a patchwork of dread across the terrain. The cave was at the center of it all, the wound that fed the sickness outward. But the cave wasn't just a place. It was becoming a presence. I could feel it even miles away. In the way the river stilled when I drew water, in the way the elk scattered before I came into view, long before they could smell me, in the way my dreams soured into repeating loops of knocks, knocks, knocks. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that I would file my reports, keep my head down, and wait for winter to drive whatever this was back underground. But the forest doesn't wait for your decisions. It makes them for you. 2 weeks later, another ranger went missing. This one wasn't a tourist, not a hunter, not a passerby. He was one of us. His last radio call came in just after midnight. Static choked, but his voice was clear enough to slice through. "I see it, it's outside. Oh God, it's looking right at me." And then 3 slow knocks and silence. We never found him. The search for him should have lasted weeks. That's protocol when one of our own vanishes. But after 5 days of combing the valley, the command post called it off. Too dangerous, they said. Too much risk with the fire season starting early. The official report blamed disorientation, a fall, maybe drowning in the creek. But the rangers who had gone deepest into the hollow, men and women who had worked these woods longer than I had, refused to speak of what they saw. One came back pale as ash, hands trembling too hard to hold his canteen. He left the service the following week without explanation. I stayed, maybe out of pride. Maybe out of fear that leaving would make the whispers true, that the forest wasn't just claiming tourists anymore, but us. Rangers, the so-called guardians. I told myself someone had to stay behind to watch the line between man and whatever waited beyond the trees. But the truth was darker. I needed to understand. At night, I began writing down what I experienced, not the official reports, but the private ones. Notes about the knocks, the smells, the strange changes in air pressure, the way my compass sometimes spun lazy circles near the ridge. I didn't tell anyone about the voice on the radio or the breathing that followed me on patrol. Some truths make you sound insane before they save you. It was late July when the forest bared its teeth again. I was patrolling near Elk Draw, a meadow ringed with tall spruce, when the temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath. My shirt clung with sweat one minute. The next I shivered as though I'd stepped into winter. The silence was complete. No birds, no insects, no breeze. That silence pressed against my eardrums until they ached. Then came the sound. Not knocking this time, not breathing. A whistle. 3 notes, high and thin, drifting from the tree line. It almost sounded human, like a man trying to mimic birdsong, but it was wrong. Hollow, empty of air. I raised my binoculars, scanning the trees. That's when I saw them. 2 pale shapes just beyond the shade. At first I thought they were stones, sun-bleached trunks. But they moved. Eyes, enormous, unblinking, reflecting the light like wet glass. My throat closed. They were too far apart to belong to a deer, too high to be a bear. They were fixed on me, patient, unflinching. I forced myself not to run. Running triggers predators, even the ones you don't have names for. Slowly, I backed toward the trail, radio pressed to my lips. This is Ranger North. Possible contact near Elk Draw. Request backup. Static answered. No voices. The eyes vanished. Not like they blinked, not like they turned away. One moment they were there, the next they dissolved into the dark. The whistle followed, closer now. Behind me. I spun, rifle raised. Nothing. Just the meadow, stretching empty. The air warmed again, as if the whole encounter had been some fever dream, but the smell of iron lingered, heavy and metallic. When I returned to the outpost, I locked every window, every door. Still, the knocks came. Always 3. Sometimes at the wall, sometimes on the roof, sometimes on the floorboards beneath my bed. I tried to drown them out with the generator's hum, with the crackle of the radio, but nothing stopped them. One night, the knocking didn't stop at 3. It kept going. 4, 5, 6. Each one harder, closer, shaking the walls. My chest tightened with the weight of it, like the entire forest was pounding against the cabin, as if demanding to be let inside. I shouted, fired a warning shot through the ceiling. Silence followed. But when I stepped outside at dawn, the ground was marked. Not footprints, not claws, just circles pressed into the dirt, wide and deep, as if someone had set down massive stones that had since been lifted away. The longer I stayed, the more the forest seemed to bend around me. I stopped trusting my compass. It swung in lazy loops near the ridge. My watch sometimes skipped minutes, that whole hours dissolving when I swore I'd only blinked. I'd hike patrol routes I knew by heart and find myself emerging miles from where I should have been, legs shaking, lungs raw, no memory of turning. The other rangers began avoiding me. Maybe they sensed it clinging to me like smoke. Maybe they just didn't want my madness in their cabins. Either way, I was left alone with it. And then came the night I broke. It was late, the generator running low on fuel, the cabin lit only by lantern glow. The radio crackled alive with sudden violence, screeching so loud I thought it would burst my eardrums. I staggered to the desk, hand fumbling for the dial. Through the static, I heard the voice again. "You're next." The voice wasn't the missing rangers this time. It wasn't human at all. too deep, too wet, gurgling like it rose from a throat filled with mud. I dropped the receiver, stumbled back, and that's when I smelled it again. Blood, stronger than ever, filling the cabin as though the walls themselves were bleeding. My eyes watered, stomach convulsing. Then came the whistle. From inside the cabin, I spun, flashlight beam cutting across the room. The whistle repeated, high and hollow, just behind me. I whipped around again. Nothing. My skin crawled, every hair on my arms rigid, and then knock. This time not on the walls, not on the roof, not on the floor. On the inside of the cabin door. I didn't open it. Couldn't. My body locked, every instinct screaming. Instead, I backed into the corner, rifle raised, lantern trembling. The knock repeated. Slow. Patient. I fired a shot through the wood, ears ringing with the blast. Silence followed. When I dared to open the door at dawn, there was no hole. No bullet damage at all. Just smooth, untouched wood. That was when I realized it wasn't trying to get in. It was already here. The forest wasn't something outside anymore. It had rooted itself inside me, twisted into my thoughts, bled into my dreams. I could feel it pressing from the edges of my mind, whispering through the static, whistling in the silence. The cave was just its mouth. The knocks were just its breath. And I knew then what the old ranger's final call had really meant. Don't follow it in. But I had. With every step toward the hollow, every night I stayed in that cursed cabin. Every time I listened, when the static rose, and it wasn't done with me yet. I tried to file my words like nothing was happening, but my handwriting betrayed me. The logbooks filled with jagged lines, words scribbled and struck through, my notes more confession than record. When I flipped through the pages weeks later, I barely recognized my own script, half warnings, half prayers. The other rangers stopped checking in on me. Maybe they thought I was slipping, or maybe they didn't want to be dragged into whatever had hollowed out Black Hollow. Either way, their absence left me with the one companion I could never silence, the radio. The static had grown bolder. It didn't wait for night anymore. It cut into my patrols, breaking over the speaker like a cough of the mountain itself. Sometimes it was only hiss and crackle, sometimes it layered with noises I couldn't name, wet footsteps, something dragging, the wheeze of breath. But more often than not, it was voices. Not one voice. Many. Some were familiar. I swore I heard the young couple from Denver, their words scrambled but desperate. Please. Lost help. Sometimes I caught a name shouted over and over, swallowed by static. Sometimes it was laughter, too distorted to sound human. And beneath them all, in a deeper current. That voice I'd heard once before, the one too heavy and wet to belong to any throat, speaking in a language that bent my ears like rock cracking under pressure. I stopped answering. What was there to say? That I believed them? That I was afraid? The forest doesn't care about fear. It just waits until you drown in it. But the forest wasn't waiting anymore. It started leaving things for me. The first was a strip of leather, hung neatly from a nail on the cabin door. My flashlight beam froze on it, stomach dropping. It wasn't leather. It was a boot tongue. Torn from a hiking boot, laces still dangling, stiff with blood. The second came 2 nights later, a ranger's hat, brim soaked dark, placed dead center on my porch. The third, worse than both, appeared on my desk inside the locked cabin, a folded map of the ridge, a circle scrawled in red marker around the cave mouth. The ink was fresh, still tacky. The knocks followed, never random now, always the same rhythm. Slow, deliberate, calling me out. Sleep became impossible. My dreams turned into copies of the forest, but wrong. The trees bent in impossible directions, shadows moved without light, and always, always, the cave was there. Sometimes I dreamed of the inside, stone walls slick with something wet, tunnels bending downward forever, and something moving in the dark, arms too long, shoulders brushing stone, teeth like antlers. But it wasn't just dreams. One night I woke to find the lantern blown out. The cabin was pitch black, my lungs dragging for air like I'd been underwater, and from the corner where no door or window stood, I heard breathing. Deep, slow, inches away. I froze, throat tight, rifle slipping uselessly from my hands. The breathing moved around me, circling. Then it stopped. The lantern flickered alive without my touch, its flame steady. The cabin was empty. The next day I found claw marks. No, not claws. Fingers. 5 deep grooves carved into the wooden beam above my bunk. I couldn't stay much longer. Every instinct screamed at me to leave the post, to hand over the keys, to walk out of those woods and never return. But pride is heavier than instinct. The badge on my chest wasn't just metal, it was proof I'd kept the line between man and wild for decades. To abandon it now felt like dying before the thing even touched me. So I stayed, and the forest grew braver. On an evening patrol near the hollow, I found tracks again. Not footprints in the human sense, but depressions in the earth, wide and deep, spaced far apart. I crouched beside one, my hand fitting inside like a child's toy. The moss was crushed flat, damp soil pressed inches deep. Whatever made it was heavy, too heavy to move as silently as it did. The air stilled, my skin prickled, and then, behind me, the whistle. I turned, rifle raised. My flashlight beam caught the edge of something moving between trees. Tall, gray, shoulders hunched so high they nearly brushed the branches. I stumbled back, breath ragged. The figure froze, half shrouded in shadow. Its face, if you could call it that, was pale, featureless, smooth like stone worn by centuries of rain. But where eyes should have been, 2 black hollows reflected my light back at me. It didn't charge, didn't flee. It just stood there, chest rising slow, deliberate, watching. I forced my thumb against the radio, choking out possible contact. I need. Static exploded. The figure tilted its head at the sound like it was listening. Then, in perfect mimicry, the whistle echoed from its mouth, 3 thin notes. My blood iced. That was the whistle I'd heard weeks ago at elk draw. It wasn't a signal from one of us. It was bait. I backed away, step by step, never lowering the rifle. The figure didn't move. It only watched. When I finally broke into a run, crashing through brush, I didn't stop until the cabin's door slammed behind me. My lungs burned, sweat chilled on my back. The forest outside was silent. That night, the knocks didn't come. The silence was worse. For 3 days, nothing happened. No radio interference, no strange smells, no gifts left on my porch. The forest almost felt normal again. The other rangers began to relax, even joked that maybe I'd been spooking myself. I wanted to believe them. But on the 4th night, the silence ended. The radio came alive, not with static, not with voices, but with a sound so low I felt it before I heard it. A rumble, deep, subterranean, like stone grinding against stone. It rose and rose until the lantern glass rattled on the desk, and then it broke into words. Not mine, not human. You followed. My chest seized. Now, come inside. The voice was layered, as if spoken by many throats at once, some high, some impossibly deep. It didn't echo through the speaker, it echoed inside my head, the cave. I knew then what it wanted. All the gifts, all the knocks, all the voices, they weren't meant to drive me away. They were meant to lead me in, to bring me to the one place the forest guarded like a heart. I sat in the lantern glow, rifle across my knees, sweat soaking my shirt. My breath came shallow, ragged. The cave was calling. God help me, wanted to answer. The weeks that followed blurred into one long stretch of sleepless nights and hesitant days. And though the world outside the ranger station carried on with its rhythms, elk grazing in the meadows, rivers coursing down from the high snowfields, the wind singing through endless groves of aspen, I felt as if I had been shifted just slightly out of step with it all. Nothing lined up the way it once had. Every sound seemed to carry a secret echo, as if I were standing inside some vast cave, even under an open sky. I began to dread dusk more than ever before. In daylight, I could still convince myself that the memories were fading, that what I'd heard and seen might have been tricks of exhaustion or overwork. But as the light bled away over the ridge, my heart would pound in anticipation, waiting for something, anything, to rise up out of the growing dark. Sometimes it was nothing more than silence so thick it felt alive, pressing in against the cabin walls. Other times, faint sounds teased me into believing the forest itself was leaning closer. One night, long after midnight, the radio crackled. My body went cold. Static hissed and pulsed, then faded into what almost sounded like breathing. Not the accidental kind of noise you get from interference, but slow, deliberate inhales and exhales. My name whispered once, just once, and then nothing. I didn't sleep at all after that. I sat at the little desk, staring at the microphone, daring it to come alive again. By morning, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, but the dread never fully receded. I started asking around carefully. The other rangers didn't like to talk about strange things, not openly. Still, I learned enough. Stories had been circulating here for decades, about missing hikers, about radios picking up voices that shouldn't be there, about shadowy shapes moving along ridgelines when no one was logged as being in the area. Old-timers hinted at caves in the higher elevations, places that locals avoided, places they said the earth itself guarded jealously. One story in particular struck me. A retired ranger, years before my time, had gone out to investigate a distress call from a hunting party. He never returned. Search crews found his truck abandoned at the trailhead, but no sign of him. The last transmission he ever made was scratchy, almost incoherent, but a single phrase came through clearly. "It's not an animal." I couldn't stop replaying that line in my head. On my next rotation out into the backcountry, I carried the unease with me like a second shadow. The forest didn't look different, but it felt different. Birds went silent too quickly when I passed. The air seemed colder under the thick canopy. At night, when the fire dwindled, I swore I could hear something breathing just beyond the tree line. Then came the cave. I found it by accident, though part of me wonders if I wasn't led there. I'd been following an old game trail along a narrow ravine when I noticed a section of rock face that seemed darker than it should have been, even in the mid-afternoon light. I approached, pushing through low brush, and found the mouth of a cave yawning wide, jagged as if the earth had been ripped apart. Something in me recoiled immediately. The air spilling from within was colder than the mountain wind, carrying a damp, metallic scent that made my stomach twist. It smelled like old blood and wet stone. My flashlight cut into the opening just far enough to show rough walls slick with condensation, a floor littered with bones, some small like deer, others not so easily explained. I wanted to turn back. I should have turned back, but some stubborn thread pulled me closer. I stepped inside, the sound of my boots echoing unnaturally, too sharp, too alive. The cave swallowed light greedily, forcing me to advance in shallow arcs of vision, one step at a time. The deeper I went, the more the air pressed against me. My breathing grew ragged, not just from fear, but from something heavier, thicker, as though the atmosphere itself resisted me. Then the sounds began, not the wind, not dripping water, knocks. Steady, rhythmic knocks, like someone rapping their knuckles on the cave wall just out of reach of my light. I froze, listening, counting. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. The sound moved, sometimes to my left, sometimes above me, as if the rock itself were shifting. When I finally forced self to retreat, I didn't run. I didn't dare. I walked slowly, refusing to let panic take full hold, though every nerve screamed at me to flee. The knocks followed all the way to the mouth of the cave, then stopped the moment daylight touched my face again. Back at camp, I sat shaking by the fire, trying to steady my hands enough to write in the logbook. But the pen scratched across the page in uneven lines, the words barely legible. Not an animal. Don't go back. Yet I knew I would go back. Because some things, once glimpsed, do not let you go. And I could already feel the cave calling me again, whispering in the back of my mind every time the night fell silent. I didn't tell anyone about the cave. Not officially, not even in the daily reports I filed at the ranger station. I knew what would happen if I did. Raised eyebrows, a chuckle, maybe a quiet note in my file about stress or mental fatigue. Out here, reputation matters. If your colleagues start doubting your judgment, you lose more than their trust. You lose the thin rope of credibility that keeps you tethered to sanity when the forest presses in too close. So I kept it to myself. But the silence didn't last. Over the next weeks, small things began to change. I started noticing tracks on trails I patrolled, massive impressions in the mud, too long, too wide, with a stride that didn't match elk, bear, or man. They appeared overnight, often in places I'd just passed the evening before, as though whatever made them was circling, waiting. Sometimes I'd smell it before I saw anything, a rank odor like wet fur and rusted iron, drifting on the breeze without warning. I'd spin in circles, scanning the trees, but nothing moved. The birds stayed hushed. Even the insects seemed to quiet. That silence was worse than any roar. And then there was the night I woke to knocking. At first, I thought it was a dream, but when I sat up in my sleeping bag, my heart racing, the sound didn't stop. 3 slow knocks. A pause. 3 more. Not on the cabin door, not on the wall, on the ground. As if something beneath the earth was striking upward into the floorboards. I held my breath until the knocking faded. But it didn't vanish into nothing. It retreated, echoing away under the ground like footsteps walking deeper and deeper into hidden corridors of stone. I hardly slept after that. Each night, I sat with my back against the wall, radio in hand, eyes locked on the dark line of the tree line beyond the windows. The cave wasn't a place anymore. It was a presence, one that followed me wherever I went. The breaking point came when I got a call over dispatch. A hiker had gone missing not far from my sector, a young man who'd been camping with friends. They reported him slipping away sometime during the night, mumbling about following a sound. His pack and boots were left behind. I knew before we even started searching. I knew where he had gone. But rules are rules, and we followed protocol. Search parties, grid sweeps, hours of shouting his name into the woods until our voices cracked. The only thing we found was a single sock snagged on a branch, stiff with dampness, as though he'd been dragged barefoot through the undergrowth. When the official search was suspended, I couldn't let it go. I went back to the cave, alone. The mouth yawned darker than ever, waiting, breathing. My flashlight beam wavered as I stepped inside, and I swore I heard something shift in the darkness, like a body turning over in restless sleep. The knocks came quicker this time, impatient. Not just from the walls, above, below, all around. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I pressed deeper. I thought of the missing hiker, of the stories whispered about the ranger who never returned, of my own nights filled with phantom noises. The cave narrowed into a tunnel, and the smell hit me so hard I gagged. Wet earth, rotting fur, and something else, sweet and metallic, unmistakably human. And then my radio crackled, static hissed, sputtered, and through it came a voice. Weak, garbled, but clear enough to stop me cold. Help, I'm still here. The missing hiker. His voice. I staggered forward, blinded by the sudden surge of hope and terror. My flashlight caught on something glistening ahead. Not water, not stone. A wall of claw marks gouged deep into the rock, each groove wider than my hand, as if something with impossible strength had tried to claw its way out. The voice came again, but closer now, not through the radio. It whispered from the dark ahead, too clear, too human to be anything else. And yet beneath it, layered so faintly I almost missed it, came another sound, a low, guttural growl that vibrated in my bones. Something was waiting for me just beyond the reach of my light. I should have turned back then. I should have run. But I didn't, because once you hear a voice calling for help, you either answer or you spend the rest of your life haunted by the echo. The tunnel sloped downward, and I had to brace myself with one hand against the wall as I went deeper, the rock slick and damp beneath my palm. My flashlight caught flickers of movement, shadows that twisted as if they had substance of their own. My breath came shallow, ragged, and every step forward felt like a decision I could never undo. The voice called again, "Please, help me." It was him, the missing hiker. Same cadence, same desperation his friends had described when they told us how he left the camp. But there was something in the tone, an echo, like it wasn't just his voice, but 1,000 others speaking alongside him, all weaving through the same desperate plea. I stopped. My chest tightened as if invisible hands had wrapped around my ribs. The cave had grown warmer. My flashlight beam shimmered in the air as if it were cutting through heat rising off asphalt. The smell of rot thickened until it felt alive, coiling down my throat. And then the growl came again. It didn't echo like the voice. It pressed in from every direction, vibrating through the rock, through the soles of my boots, through the fillings in my teeth. My flashlight flickered. I slapped it, desperate to keep the beam steady, but the darkness seemed to push back harder, swallowing the light. I realized then the growl wasn't behind the voice. It wasn't beneath it. It was inside it. The plea twisted midward, warping into something that scraped across my nerves like claws against glass. A laugh, wet, broken, jagged, tore through the tunnel, and then the knocks started again. Not steady this time. Frenzied. Everywhere. The walls convulsed with the sound, as if hundreds of fists were hammering from within, all demanding release. Dust and grit rained from the ceiling. I stumbled backward, my boot crunching on something brittle. I lowered the beam. A bone. Human. The floor was scattered with them, shards of femurs, ribs, teeth glinting in the light. Piles of clothing, too, shredded and matted with filth, as if everything that wandered in was stripped to pieces and left to rot here. I couldn't breathe. My chest locked up, lungs refusing to draw air. The knocks thundered, closer now, circling. I knew if I hesitated one more second, I would never leave. So I ran. I bolted through the tunnel, light swinging wildly, catching glimpses of walls scored with gouges deeper than my arm. Behind me, the growl rose into a roar, so loud the ground shook beneath my feet. The voice called my name now, my name, drawn out and broken, like it had been waiting for me all along. I burst from the mouth of the cave into daylight, collapsing onto the dirt, clawing at the ground as though the earth itself might swallow me whole. The forest was dead silent. Not a bird, not a squirrel, nothing. I forced myself up, stumbling toward camp. Every step felt like dragging myself through water, heavy, unnatural. I didn't dare look back. That night, I sat by the fire with the radio clutched in my hands. I told myself I wouldn't turn it on. But when the static hissed to life on its own, I couldn't tear my eyes away. The voice came again. Not from the cave this time, from the radio. Still here. The fire snapped, sending sparks into the air, and I swear, for just a heartbeat, the smoke curled into the shape of a hand reaching for me. I didn't sleep that night. I don't sleep much anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the knocks again. Sometimes beneath my cabin floor, sometimes from the walls, sometimes from inside my own head. And the voice. Always the voice. But it isn't just the hiker anymore. It's the ranger who went missing years ago. It's others too. Voices I've never heard before, all tangled together, all echoing from someplace deeper than stone. Sometimes late at night, I wonder if they're all still in there, wandering endless tunnels, calling out into the dark. Sometimes I wonder if that's what will happen to me, because I know one day soon I'll hear the final call over the radio. My call. My voice. Echoing back to me long after I'm gone. And when it comes, no one will believe it. They'll shake their heads, tell themselves it was just interference, just static. But deep in the forest, the cave will still be waiting, and my final radio call will keep echoing in the dark.